Welcome to the Pod. I'm here with Sadie K, content writer, and my podcast coach.
Hello.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you here for this episode, especially since it's such a very important discussion for the month of October because of Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Yes, I agree. It is so important. I'm really excited to dive into this with you as a survivor of domestic violence and talking with you who is also a survivor.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like this whole month we're going to be diving in and, you and I talked about how we would go about this. And I'm very excited to really show each part of domestic violence because a lot of people think that it's strictly physical and it's only toward women, but we've been learning that there's so much more to it and there's more actual ways of abuse than just physical.
Yeah, totally. And that's what gets so many people thrown off of the subject is because one, we don't have enough awareness of what it actually is and how to speak about it. We don't have the language on a general population level that we can use to have conversations that are meaningful and actually inspire change. And so, first of all, disclaimer, I want to say that I'm not a domestic violence expert. I am not a psychiatrist and I'm not a social worker. I'm not a behavioral neuroscientist or anything of the sorts. I am strictly a survivor with personal experience as somebody who was physically abused, emotionally abused, mentally abused, and psychologically abused. And so my goal with this episode is to, one, spread awareness of what it does look like outside of the physical realm and how that can actually cause physical effects when your mind is affected in such a way that it affects your body for the rest of your life. It doesn't matter if you were hit or if you were abused physically in any manner. It matters how your body reacts later on, and so yeah, I'm really excited to dive into that.
Absolutely. And I love that you bring that up because the results of any form of abuse really is long term. It feels like, because I know for me, it happened in about, I want to say like around 2012, and it was 2 years. Well, maybe 2011. I can't remember the exact form, but anyway, 2012 was definitely the memory there. And it still, affects my life to this day. And I didn't realize this until I was learning more about the statistics myself, and that PTSD is actually a very natural response to the abuse as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that can be so harmful in later relationships after the abuse or just in feeling like you're living a fulfilling life outside of the abuse. That's something that I think you're going to talk on later on in the October. But yeah, as for using this episode and our goal with this episode, I think it's important that we touch on the different types of abuse, how it shows up, how we can see it as outsiders. And also some tips as to how we could maybe help people or be there as support for them if they are in an abusive situation.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the different types because I knew that there was physical abuse. I knew that there's mental, and I think mental and psychological are both kind of around the same. But I didn't know, or I didn't think about it, that there's also economical or with your money kind of abuse too, where they have control of your finances as well.
Yeah, and that is something that I have not personally experienced. I mean, we can kind of say I did. I guess I was the breadwinner of my relationship at the time. So I had this false sense of dominance in the relationship. But I know that my financial situation, ours as a collective unit, it really put a toll on my partner at the time. And he felt a lot of demasculization feelings about me making more money than him. And so that was kind of a reason for the abuse. Now, that wasn't necessarily financial abuse, But I know that I've seen in other relationships where women will not be allowed to have jobs, or women will, I'm saying women because it disproportionately affects women, gender-based violence. I know this is an issue that spans across way past the binary, for all genders and non-conforming people. But I'm going to speak from that perspective as a
Yeah.
woman who is talking about a mostly women's-based issue. So I know that I've seen women in relationships where they were not allowed to hold jobs. They were told how to spend their money, or what they couldn't do with their money, or what they could do with their money. They were given allowances. And this happens all the time. And it's not usually seen as abuse because it's something that is not really talked about. People don't really talk about money out in the open. So you're not going to go up to your friends and be like, my husband gives me a $200 a month allowance, because that's not something you like, that is normal in society, right? And that's what makes it hard to recognize. But if you are somebody who is in a situation where your partner is controlling your finances, that is absolutely abuse. And they're not doing it to protect you or take care of the family or anything. That's a form of control. And it's taking away your autonomy as an individual, with or without a job. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely. And I feel what's crazy about, ow, sorry, my puppy's with me for everyone that is. Um, I feel what's crazy about this is, and I shouldn't really use that term, but it's the best I could come up with at this time, is that all of the abuses such as psychological, the money, and physical, it's all about power and control. And so it's just wild that, like, even with money, like, it's just like when they try to take individuals and they like separate you from your family, they separate you from your friends. It's just, I would assume with the money, it's the same way. It's like separating you from having any form of self. Like your self is gone, and it feels like you are like a clone of them, or what they want you to be, the robot. So it's just listening to that. I mean, for my abuse, it was not necessarily money, but I do remember there was a time that we we had an apartment together. We didn't have a lot of money because I was going to school, but we were both working. And there was a time that I had bought him a gift, like, I would say it was a just because gift. It was not Christmas, but he never used it. So I had a choice. I was like, well, I should take this gift back. I still had time to do so, and buy turkey, because we just needed some lunch meat at the time. And I think I was going to get paid like that next Friday, but I wanted to get lunch meat for us. And I did that. And then he told his whole family that I basically stole his gift that was for Christmas, which is not true. And that I was selfish, and that and he made it sound like I used it for like something that was, not really like for the home, or I don't even know what he told them I bought, but he did not tell them it was for turkey. And in my abusive relationship, unfortunately, he got his family involved. So I would get, his upset, and then he would take that to his family, and then they would get into the upset. And so they were like, well, why did you bring his gift back? That was rude. And so then I always felt like I was always defending myself for decisions that I thought were for lifestyle. So that is one of the experience I definitely had with the financial aspect, is that he made it as though I, took his like best gift ever for turkey. It was weird. The weirdest fight I've ever had in my life with him.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that you experienced that. That's super unfair. And like, you didn't deserve that, obviously. You were trying to do something that made sense and was very practical. And I think that's really common for abusers to go outside of the unit of the relationship and try to shift the perception of those around the relationship, right? And it's very, very common in these situations where they had something happen to them in their mind, when in fact it was kind of just like a lack of communication at that point, or a shifted perspective. And that wasn't anything that garnered somebody leaving the unit to go and talk shit basically to their family members and shifting the perception of you outside of it. But it's super common. It's super common. And those are the little things where it's like you enter a relationship and you don't think that you're getting beat up. You don't think that you're being abused. But when you look at the big picture over time, there's these little things that manipulators use to break their victim down, to make them feel less aware, to make them feel less in control, to make them feel less secure in who they are and what they know and how they see the world. And they do that by shifting their own perspective and gaslighting, right? And also shifting the perspective of those around them, so that they really feel that they're trapped in this world as the crazy person, as the sad person, as the insane person. And it's super harmful. It makes my blood boil, truly.
Yeah. And what scares me is for the people that are in it now and that have experienced this abuse and any form of these abuses during COVID. I mean, I feel like COVID had to have brought out a lot more statistics, but obviously not probably, called in or talked about because, that people lost jobs. So you have that financial loss. Then you're with your partner. A lot of people were not used to having their partner in their space for, the amount of time that we had to, or I guess still kind of have to be together. And I'm not sure how that would have went if, I was still in my relationship back then in these COVID times either, because that's a lot of time. Some people use the work time, to feel semi safe as you can, which is you never feel safe. You feel unsafe the whole time, but
Right. And not only that, I mean, COVID kind of, everybody was on edge. And I mean, you could say, oh, I don't care, I'm fine, I'm vaccinated now, but we're still a very anxious collective as it is. Like, we are not sure of the future economically and in the way that we function as a society. We don't know what to look forward to because we're scared that it might completely fall on top of its head like it did 2 years ago. And so that heightened anxiety, plus the lockdown, when you're locked in, if you are somebody who is being abused, if you're locked in with that anxiety and with that partner who's also experiencing that anxiety, I can only imagine the tumultuous behaviors that grew out of something like that. And it's scary to think about how many women probably were getting stimulus checks taken away from them, and how many women were, I'm saying women again because I'm focusing on the 85+%. But what people in general, when they were in that situation, boxed in with their abuser, it probably did a whole lot of undue traumatic manipulation. It was just super scary. And yeah, there's just so much to say about it, especially on like a societal level too. It's you're looking at the statistics and you're thinking, how could this be? Like, how could this many, I'm again saying men, because it's like, why is this so disproportionately like men? Like, what are they suffering with that's causing them to act out in this way, causing them to lash out on people around them? And it's so much more deeply seated than we can probably even get into in this episode, but it's something worth talking about for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's why when you and I were talking about how I would go about these episodes, it's so important to use the whole month, because there's so much, like, it's not like, oh, it's just the physical, it's not just the mental and the psychological. Of course, the money as well. There's so much. There's the safety plans that are out there, and there's people not knowing, or maybe not even educated in, which is not on them. Just it's just the awareness portion of it, of how they can get the help and what they can do.
Um, so I wanted to continue discussing the other forms of abuse. And I know that before this call started, you and I talked about how mental and psychological abuse is like the main source of all abuse.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the better verbiage would be that all abuse affects the victim psychologically, which means it affects them mentally, emotionally, physically. It'll play out in their life in a million different ways: chronic illness, like likelihood of strokes and heart disease and other chronic pain issues. And it can also play out in finances if someone is abused and then turns to impulsive spending or is unable to hold a job, you know. So yeah, I think being psychologically abused is to completely and holistically be abused as it pertains to your entire life. You know, it affects every single area.
And how does one define psychological abuse?
Oh, good question. I don't have the exact definition in front of me, but I would, as somebody who's experienced it, I would say that it's a loss of self. It's on a realist level. It's when your partner shows you through their actions and their words and their treatment of you that you are less of a person than you actually are, and you have less rights to your personhood and your fulfillment of self than they do, or any other person does, and that there is something inherently flawed with you and the way you think and the way you see the world, and therefore you shouldn't trust yourself. You shouldn't trust your intuition. You shouldn't try new things because that's pointless. And it really just puts you into a state of pure depression, of pure hopelessness, of pure loss of self, really.
Yeah, I feel like that also brings in the gaslighting, which is where you are not even sure of the sense of your reality, of what's going on, because they make you feel like that didn't happen, even though you could see them physically move a pen, and they're like, I didn't move that pen. You didn't see that. And you start to believe, you're like, well, did I see the pen move or did I not see the pen move? And I feel like gaslighting goes along with psychological abuse, where I felt in my own experience that like it just was a constant of questioning yourself, like, is this like what is my actual reality versus the truth, I guess, or with that.
Yeah, it's extremely harmful. And when you lose yourself, like how many other terrible things are you setting yourself up for when you don't trust yourself, when you don't understand why you do the things you do, or why you are with the people you're with, or why you're around the people you're around. Like if you don't trust the decisions you're making, you're not going to be one to make decisions at all. You're not going to take new opportunities. You're not going to strive for more because it's purposeless. There isn't any purpose behind your action or behind your intention because you are less of a person than the people around you, than your abuser, you know, and you don't have the dominant voice within your own self because it's been so dimmed and so suppressed by this person's abuse. And that just, yeah, it leads to so much harm.
Yeah, absolutely. And just hearing you say that, like, it brings me back to the times of almost, I feel like the abuser creates that environment where you are reliant on them for, what way to go, what to think, and so on and so forth. And of course, I think my friend said this perfectly. She was giving me the analogy of how it's like a frog being boiled in water, where in the beginning you're not realizing that this is what is happening in your environment. It's just slowly getting there. And then once it's finally is boiling, you're just like, whoa. Sometimes you're like, whoa. And sometimes you just may still be living in the boiling water. And just not realize like these strong emotions. Like for me, I know codependency was huge because he took away myself, my identity, and my identity became whatever he wanted it to be. And I appreciate you. I wanted to say this before. I appreciate you being so vulnerable with us and sharing your own experience, because I feel that experiences from our perspectives are very helpful to share as well, because we are survivors. And for our listeners out there, we did get out, but we're also letting you know that there's also that long term that came with it at the end as well. So I wanted to also talk about, so we've talked about the mental abuse, the psychological abuse, physical, and we've talked about the financial and economic abuse. But there's also another form of abuse that we don't always, I think, talk about or put out there in awareness, and it's the cultural and identity abuse that's out there as well.
I also haven't experienced this, especially, and I'm sure you haven't much, because we are white women in America, and so most of our identity is we gain it from our environment, and our environment was made for us as white women, right? So I could see this happening, and we do see this happening a lot more in relationships where there is a individual who is being victimized by their abuser, and this person is being stripped of what they knew to be true, and their past experiences and their traditions and their cultural identity, like what makes them them, their food. It could even be their food from their culture, from what they grew up with. Their abuser could take that away from them completely and say, this isn't what we do. This isn't what we cook. This isn't what we, we're changing everything that you are so that you have no ground to stand on anymore. And that's when things really spill over, right? And yeah, that's something that I rarely hear talked about in circles when discussing domestic violence and intimate partner abuse. And it is something that needs to be talked about a lot more. And I think that it is definitely best talked about by people who have experienced it. So people who are classified as minorities, or who have really identified with their culture that is outside of their environment, in their immediate environment, you know? So.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with you of not wanting to take any experience in that, because we do not know. But it is so disheartening that it's not really talked about, the awareness. For example, with the recent news that happened where we had Gabby Petito, but then Gabby, you know, she was out there and her story has been shared, but I didn't learn about the 710 Indigenous women that have been killed in that same area or missing for a while now. And I only learned that actually through you and through Gabby Petito's case. And I did not realize how as a society and what we want to see on the media, how we have influenced the media to only give us a white girl. And no disrespect, but it is disrespect too. We should be talking about the 710 women.
Yeah, and that's kind of like a form of like systemic abuse almost. It's something that's deeply rooted and ingrained within our blueprint as a culture, and what we see as good and pure and what we classify to be newsworthy, and the intersection between those, and the fact that whiteness is at the root and of the desired image beneath all of it. And it's really, yeah, you're right. It's really shitty that we have to hear about this blow up on social media of a white woman, which of course, like you've said in the past, no disrespect to Gabby and her family, like that's a tragedy, of course. But talking about other tragedies does not take away from that tragedy at all. It just lifts them up. And that's a good thing. So don't be sorry. I mean, it's okay. We're all learning. And it's a good thing to talk about and to recognize that there are discrepancies within a lot of media and the way that we view media as consumers. And we have a responsibility in how we uplift and converse about those topics. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's something that exists within smaller circles because of the systemic abuse that happens at the very, very bottom level of the giant, right?
So as we have spoke about cultural and identity abuse, which also includes the LGBTQT group as well, it's just very important to know that it's not just like abuse. It does not discriminate. It can happen to everyone, and I'm glad that we have defined the types of abuse, because a lot, including myself, have not realized that it's not just physical, it's not just mental, there's a lot of form that's financial, and the sexual abuse, which we didn't necessarily touch base on, but I feel like that one is kind of
Self-explanatory.
yeah, self-explanatory, absolutely. But what I did want to also discuss with you, a lot of the questions that I'm sure you've heard as well is, well, why didn't you get out? Why didn't you, and we say to ourselves too, like later in life, like, well, I've been working on it personally in counseling, but we ask our own selves, like, why didn't we leave when we saw that first red flag? How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel that those kinds of conversations are just so pointless. Like, why are we centering the victim and their victimhood when we could be centering the conversation around solutions and asking ourselves instead, why would that man abuse that woman? Why do men disproportionately abuse women? Why are these communities impacted much more by abuse in intimate partner relationships than in other communities? Those are the questions we need to be asking ourselves, and we need to be talking about with other people, because the other way around is pure victim blaming. And it's much easier to just gossip in that way by discussing the victim and their lack of action, rather than the act itself, because it's a terrifying act. And the fact that it's done by so many people, it's really hard to have those conversations, because you have to look at yourself and see the statistics as 1 in 3 women. That means you, your mom, your grandma, one of you has been abused. Or it could mean 1 in 2 men, which have abused or raped. 1 in 2 men, which means your brother or your dad. And so that kind of reflection is what stops people from having those conversations, because you're talking about the people next to you, right? And that's where it gets really hard to talk logically about these things, instead of from a place of pure emotion and resentment for the idea of your dad or your brother or your own boyfriend being somebody who could abuse women. But it's a necessary evil that we need to conquer, right? So in my own personal situation, when I left my abuser, at the time, I'd never wanted to leave, because I had been running my first business and everything felt really, really shaky. I was very insecure in who I was and my image and my self-confidence and my identity. However, I felt like I needed my relationship to be that one anchor. Regardless of how much it was harming me, I needed that to be one for sure thing that I could count on at the end of the day to go home to, even if it was abuse. And did I hold shame and regret over that? Yeah, for sure. I don't think anybody wouldn't. But it's something that I felt at the time I needed, and something that I had to give myself grace for dealing with at that time, because I thought it's what was best. And I also know that it's not something that was truly my fault. It wasn't my act of staying in a shitty situation. It was my partner's act of forcing me to remain in a shitty situation where I was being harmed. And so when I had left him, it wasn't really an act of my own will. Honestly, it was a bystander who was standing outside of our apartment who heard my screams and thankfully called the cops. Otherwise, I think I would have died. I had a knife to my stomach. Oh, trigger warning, violence, abuse. I had, my partner was on drugs. He was on acid, which is something he like never really did. And so I was terrified. I had no idea what he could do possibly. And I mean, I had had experiences with acid in the past, but it was in like hippie college dorm rooms. Like it was very chill. Like there was no knife being held to my stomach. I'm laughing because I'm so uncomfortable thinking about this again. But yeah, at the time my ex had been holding a knife to my stomach. He was on acid. He was drunk. And I just remember him telling me that he was going to get me pregnant and make me stay with him forever, which is sexual abuse, mental abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, all of the abuse in one sentence. And as I was laying on that couch, I was like just praying because my phone was dead. And I was like, dear God, just get me out of this somehow. Like, I don't know. I don't even know if I believe in you, God, but just help. Like, I have nothing else at this point. I thought I was going to die. And so thankfully, the neighbors called the cops, and I saw the lights coming from outside, and I was like, the cops are here. And so he ran out the back door and left everything as it was. And the couch was torn up and there was glass everywhere, and it was just a pure mess. And so I didn't want to press charges, of course, at first, because I was terrified that he was going to come after me. But the state of North Dakota decided to press charges, thank goodness. And then they protected me as I left that vicinity and went to my friend's house at that point. So I was very, very grateful for that bystander. And I think that's something that also needs to be talked about, is the bystander effect, and victims being victimized because of bystanders and their lack of willingness to step in or say something. Or even on a lower level, the bystander effect plays out by locker room talk and men not holding other men accountable for the misogynistic things that they say, or the sexist things they say, or the discriminatory things that they say towards people of color, or people within the LGBTQI plus community. And that is really where it all starts. We need to start holding each other, men, non-binary people, men, women, everybody needs to hold each other accountable for those slight little sentences that are very discriminatory and oppressive in nature. And that's where real change will start happening, also in the family. But so much to cover. We don't have time to get into all of that. And that's what you're going to be focusing on throughout the month of October, which I'm really excited to listen to.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think one of the things when you talk about the bystander, one of the things I've recently seen a lot of is that there are still people that question, like, to bring back up the Gabby Petito case, for example, because it is so popular, not in a good way, but popular out there. There's still people that were like, oh, she was the aggressor. He was so nice, he's cool and collected. And for me personally, it brought back a lot of emotions because there was a lot of people in my own life that, not necessarily my close family, because I didn't really tell them what was going on, but just some friends that felt I was making it up or it wasn't that bad. they didn't want to believe it, and I understand people don't want to believe it. You don't want to believe it when you're in it. You know, you don't want to believe that you're there. And on a side note to you, I appreciate you sharing what happened, with you and how you got out. And I'm very happy that North Dakota decided, now we're going to charge him, because that just sounds like such a scary position to be in. And I'm proud of you. And look at you now. You are just a beautiful light to the world in so many ways, not just with your content writing, but just with your awareness, your advocacy. It's just beautiful. So I appreciate you for sharing that, because I know it's not easy to go back and not necessarily go back, but to kind of live it by sharing as well. So thank you.
I appreciate you giving me the time to have this conversation, because I love talking about these things. And I think there's certain ways to do it in which will elicit more and more change. And so I'm glad that we can talk about this. And I'm glad that the BrePod listeners are, they have a community and a platform where somebody is willing to let them express their experiences and the trauma they've held and what they're letting go of and how they're moving forward, because it's so important. And obviously things need to be shifted on a cultural, societal, national level, but there's also things we can do as individuals within our own lives to make shifts, one with ourselves and then two with people around us. And that's the slow but mighty change that will completely flip everything that we're talking about here on its head. I know that sounds a little utopian and a little idealist, but that's okay. We can dream for a future, because dreaming is what creates actions. So
Absolutely. Yes, and just even spreading the awareness, that's the big thing that we both have discussed. That's so important for our listeners and for whoever it reaches out to. So I just wanted to share that the rest of this month we do have a lot of beautiful souls coming in to share their experience, as well as helping share what is a safety plan, how can you get a safety plan, how can you get help, and the resources that are available to you, which it's shockingly, there are a lot of resources that I didn't learn till later from my own personal experience. So I'm very excited to share that with everyone. And thank you so much, Sadie. Before we go, I would love for you to share, how can people find you?
yeah, people can find me on Instagram at Sadie, SADIEKKAY, and then the letter X at the end. You can also follow me on Instagram under my rebranded content management and consulting firm / agency, and that's Philosophy of Content. I haven't posted anything yet, but I'm gathering content for the next year, so I don't have to think about posting every day. But that'll be up within the next month. And then on Facebook, you can find me at Sadie K, or you can go to my website at www.sadiek.co, without the M, just co.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And before we go, as you know, I love to do affirmations, but I would love for you to share an affirmation that really stands out for you.
Ooh, good question. I would say we are what we think we are, and we become what we think we must become. That's a good one.
Yes, I love that. It really, something to really ponder.
Something to bring back power into our own hands. It's all us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was such an honor to have you here, and I know it won't be the last.
Of course not. I am looking forward to this month of October content. I know it's going to be so good and so helpful for so many people. Even me, as somebody who's a survivor and who's been through the entire roundabout of this issue, I am looking forward to hearing more perspectives and more resources and about more information that needs to be heard. So thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have a good day.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.